Health and Wellness Center studios in Lubbock, Texas. And we're on the radio. We're on social media. I actually think we got it going tonight on Instagram. Let me see what we got here. Let me see. I thought maybe that we were live on Instagram tonight, but I'm not 100% sure. We're trying to get this worked out on all our social media pages so that everybody has an opportunity to see us if they want to. And I really don't know if we're live on Instagram, but we'll check it out and see what happens here in a little while. See if it ends up being that way. If any of you guys follow us on Instagram, maybe you could text me 806-794-0400. That's our text line. 806-794-0400. Or you can get us on Facebook, YouTube, or X, and maybe you can get us on Instagram, or maybe you can't. Not exactly sure. But hey, we had you guys on the radio. It's glad to have you back tonight. We had some technical difficulties last night, and I just lost you in the middle of the show. I couldn't get you back, and we just had to cut it out and move on to the next thing. If you want to go back and watch last night's show, you could check it out on the Rock Health and Wellness Center's Facebook page. That's where we were last night, and that's where the show, you could go back and watch the show. So what we did is we just audibled, and that's kind of what we're going to do. That's what we did last night. That's not what we're going to do tonight, but we audibled, we moved along, and what we talked about was stress and what happens during stress and what happens to us inside our bodies and how we have to cope with things and what happens if we get stuck in the right brain. And I know you guys think about that, or I don't know what you think, but I would think if I were y'all, why does he talk about the same thing every single time? But you know what I really don't want to do? This is a 5-night-a-week show. We've been doing it for 10. This week, we're finishing 10 months of doing this show. And one of the traps that you get into is you start talking about things that just to fill the time. And I know I could do a better job of planning out these shows, and I know I could do a better job of getting some feedback on that. I appreciate that feedback, but I know I can work on that and make sure, because there's still plenty of activity out there that we can get better at. But what I don't want to do is just start talking about things that I think are somewhat nonsense or deflective, just to talk about something. Because I see it in other podcasts that I listen to. I see it with other health and wellness guys in other podcasts. That's kind of what they end up doing, is they've talked about so many things that they just start talking about just to fill the time. They just start talking about crazy stuff. And what I would rather do is I'd rather just take these few fundamental things, because I really don't think health and wellness is that hard. I really don't think that we should be spending that much time on it, to tell you the truth. And I don't think some of us spend very much time on it at all. It's kind of obvious on that. But if you wanted to be super healthy and you wanted to live a long, healthy life, if you were to study the people who live long, healthy lives, the people in Okinawa, the people in those small towns in Italy, even the people out in Cupertino or whatever that is out in California, if you want to study that group of people who live healthy out into old age, they don't spend a ton of time. It's not that complicated. It's not rocket science. It's just nutrition. It's just exercise. It's just nervous system function. It's trying to keep yourself moving and healthy as much as possible, and that's really what it's all about. So, that's why I would rather take the same subjects, talk about them over and over and over again, see if we can map them together, see if we can overlap them together, see if we can talk about them in a way that finally, you just one of these days, it just clicks in your head. And you just finally get the combinations, however many combinations it takes to get you to that point. You get to that point and you say, man, I got it. I got it now. And now you could just move along with your life. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to get out of bed. I'm going to go for a walk. Leslie and I got out the bed this morning, went for a 30-minute walk. During the walk, we stopped and did push-ups along the way. We kind of mixed it up. We usually have our CrossFit workout on Tuesdays, but we mixed it up today, and we went for a walk around the neighborhood. It was really good. It was good for my brain. It was good to see things that were different. It was good for my eyeballs to see things that were different as we were walking around, looking at the trees and the grass. We have a beautiful park in our neighborhood where we can walk. If you can't do that, I've got a guy that goes to the mall and walks like 3 miles almost every day at the mall. He goes for his walk. That's a great place in most towns to go to. You can go to the mall, take off, and go for a walk. You could go to a place like Lowe's or Home Depot or even Walmart and just walk up and down the aisles, walk the whole store. Just take off for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, get your walk in. It's super great for your brain. It's super great to give your brain the thing that it needs in order to function properly. And that's kind of the show tonight. The show is going to be a little bit informative and a little bit study on my part. I really do want to see a little bit about. I want to take a little bit of time because I've been reading all afternoon, and I don't really want to break too much of my thought process of what I've been reading. But I want to share with you because I've been really studying our neurofeedback stuff that we got. It's some new technology that we have in the office. I've mentioned it to you before. In our brain mapping and neurofeedback is a new way of me looking for a subluxation, and it's a little bit difficult for me because a lot of the people that there are a lot of chiropractors that are using this technology, but it's also used in a lot of different fields in psychology and in the hospitals in different areas. The quantitative EEG is being used in different fields, and they're not really looking for it necessarily from a subluxation standpoint. And so what we've done is we've taken same thing with the right eye technology. We've taken the right eye technology and we've gotten it. We're using it from a standpoint to see what the brain is doing and is there any interference in the brain. And there's interference in your brain, I could promise you. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to verbalize some of this stuff tonight. I wanted to walk through it because I wanted to be able to, number one, share it with you so that you can know that we do neurofeedback and brain mapping here in the office now. But I also wanted to walk through it so that I could practice verbalizing it and trying to explain it so that maybe it makes a little bit of sense as to what we're getting from the information from the technology and what we would do with that information from the technology. And so I think I'm just going to share some of this with you, and we're just going to walk through it. Because I was walking. Let me see which one I got right here. Hang on, got several of these. That's not it. Got several of these maps. I got several of these maps open that I was looking at, and so I just wanted to share it with you. But this is the one I want to start with, and I want to just talk through some of the thoughts with it. So you guys that are on the radio, I'll try to be as descriptive as I possibly can, so that you can understand what we're doing. You can always go back. The guys over at the radio station, 98.7 Walk by Faith Radio, they do a fantastic job of sharing this information on Twitter, X, at Walk by Faith, and on Facebook at Walk by Faith. So I really do appreciate them doing that because it reaches more people. But if you guys are listening to it on the radio, or if you're streaming it on 987radio.com, or if you're listening to it on the Live 365 app, it's just audio for you. And so you're not getting any of the video that we're sharing when we're breaking down this information on social media. So you might want to go catch it. That's all I'm saying. You might want to go check it out and see what's out there. And so, but what we get, and this is going to be like a recap, a little bit of what we've had in the past, and then we'll see what we can get going with the thoughts, really. But And I also want this to be on tape so that some of the people who have been getting their brain scans, they can actually listen to me talk about this and say, oh, okay, that's what he meant by that. So you can actually go in and watch it and pick it up, and we'll go back and find out exactly where we are in the podcast to see where we want to be. But so we can send it to you and say, hey, look, go to 3 minutes or whatever, 5 minutes in, and and then you can pick that up right there, and then you'll be able to see what's going on. So what we're getting, what what's happening inside the brain is there are um, let me see where I got all these new options here that are just fantastic. I just haven't figured them all out yet, but here we go. All right. Um, there's a couple of different ways that we're getting this information in the brain, and I'm just going to try to do it as simple as I can. So if I draw a brain and we've got a right side and a left side, just like we always have. That's what we talked about last night. But this this middle section of the center of the brain, what I see in my brain as the mix master, right? In this middle section called the thalamus is the integration of sensory information other than smell. Because smell is above the thalamus, and so but this is all sensory information coming into the body. If you think about what sensory information is, there's a lot of it coming in, right? I mean, your brain's receiving 3 trillion bits of information per second, and that's just sensory because your brain is not receiving motor information as much. You're getting a lot of that sensory information that's coming in, right? So the thalamus is working with the brain stem, and it's and so the brain stem has an area in the brain stem called the reticular formation. And the reticular formation, when it fires up into the cortex. And when we say cortex, what we're talking about is basically this upper region of the brain. And I might have not have drawn that exactly right, but I'm doing it for effect. So that upper region above that black line, up into that upper region, we're getting into the outer parts of it. And it's not, we've got cortex all the way around. So in the occipital lobe, so it's really, I should just do it kind of like that. But anyway, the reticular formation is firing, and to keep us alert and awake. That's one of the things that's happening. So we're getting this neurological firing pattern. Let's so I can explain it. We'll just say we're doing this neurological firing pattern that's kind of keeping us awake. We're also getting information that between the thalamus and the reticular formation. So both of those areas are firing back and forth to each other. And hang on one second. Um, and then one second. This is life right here. Okay. Um, so the thalamus is also firing information up into the cortex. And it's doing it in different ways. It's doing it in very tight columns. It ends up in columns, and the more columns that are firing, the more amplitude we get, the more power that we get on our scan. So if we've got columns firing up and then columns firing back down and then columns firing back up to the cortex and then columns firing back down, and these are very tight columns and they're close together, we're going to get a greater amplitude. We're going to get more power. We're going to get increased power out of these particular set right there. And if we have just some scattered columns, or if the columns are spread out and they're not real close together, then we get a lower amplitude. I know that doesn't mean anything to you now, but it will here in just a second. So the way that what we're measuring in an overall, very general, broad sense is we're measuring information that's working from the thalamus up into the cortex, from the reticular activating system or the reticular formation up to the thalamus, and there's regulation in each one of these. So the pacemaker of the thalamus is firing to the cortex. The reticular activating system can slow that down. So we've got measurements of electrodes out here on the outside of the head that is measuring all of these different things that are going on underneath. That's what neurofeedback, that's what the brain map is giving us. And they've spent a lot of time to figure out how this whole thing is actually talking to itself. And that's how we match up what is going on with a person in a format of, oh man, now I lost my page. Hang on. That's how we match up what's going on with inside on a person's brain map. So this is one of them. This is the one that I did for myself. So I'm sharing that with you, the one that I did for myself. So and it was, we did several different ones, and we had different actual connections and all that sort of thing. So I'm not concerned about it, but let's just take it so that we can read it and talk about it. What we get is we get three different kinds of slow waves. We get delta waves, and delta waves are 1 to 3 hertz, and they're the very slow waves. They're as if you were completely asleep. That's the kind of brain wave that fires when you're completely asleep. Because basically what has happened is the hypothalamus and other neural circuits have just basically turned off that reticular formation and that thalamus. So the hypothalamus has just basically shut down all that activity to the point to where now we've just got super slow waves that with very little frequency that are now firing in our brain, and that is actually puts us to sleep. So we've got very slow waves, and then as we move across from left to right, these waves begin to speed up just a little bit. Now we go from delta to theta, and theta waves are still slow and very drowsy. That's what we get as we're moving across. And then as we keep going across, we've got alpha. Now, alpha is awake but calm. And then we move a little bit further over into the beta, and now we're very awake and we're quite alert. And then we'll move over into the high beta, and when we get into the high beta, now it's a high level of intensity right there. One of the things that we learned that when we were going through the training of the neurofeedback was one of the things that I thought was quite interesting was they measured this on fighter pilots in the Air Force. And what they found out was the fighter pilots that had the capacity to move between high beta and alpha waves, they were able to concentrate at a very high level, and then they were able to come back down to a calm, awake level, and then they were able to move back up to a very high level. Those were the master fighter pilots. Those were the guys who actually did the best in those simulations. The people that got stuck in the high level were the ones that didn't do a very good job. They didn't handle things very well. And so when we score this, what we want to see is we want to see gray. We don't want to see any color at all. We'd like to see, kind of like on this relative power scale, we'd like to see just almost all gray right there. And what that means is it's based on a number of people in whatever age group. This is my age group. It's based on a number of people in that age group that, and they've done statistical analysis of those brain waves and figured out standard deviations and all that statistical information to determine exactly what would be considered normal. And anything that's within one standard deviation, and I think it's that one, yeah. If I scoot it up just a little bit, there we go. Anything that's one standard deviation in both directions is considered to cover 68% of a population. So that's not really what we want to go off of. We're not worried about that first one standard deviation. We're not going to treat anything with that standard deviation. We're going to actually move up into 2 and up into 3. So really we're looking for, when we move to the right and we move into the red level, that means we have an increased amount of those type of brain waves. And when we move to the left and we move into the blue level, that means we have a decreased amount of those type of brain waves. So you kind of have to look at it and you have to understand, okay, so let's talk about this delta wave right here. This delta wave, this is almost the entire thing is solid red. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is I have an increase. That day that I got scanned, I had an increase in the delta waves in the absolute power range. And I'm not going to get into that tonight, but so what I want, I just want normal levels of delta. I don't want an increased amount of delta. And that means that part of those brain waves that are firing inside my brain are decreased. No, are increased. There's more slow waves. So what does that mean? That means that my brain is firing slower. That means that I've got more of those sleep waves firing on that particular day that I did that scan. It means that I have more of those waves firing than I do any other wave in the group in the absolute power range right there. You can go down to the bottom and you can get into phase coherence and you can get into phase lag. And that doesn't really mean anything to anybody, but one of the things is whether or not the lag speeds up or the lag slows down. And that's a good example right there. Because what lag is, it's the communication from one electrode to the other, one part of the brain to another part of the brain. And if it's supposed to be like beep, 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 and that's the rhythm that it's supposed to go at, that means how much time did it lag between the one beep to the next beep? How much time did it take? Beep, beep. We could measure that amount of time. Well, if the lag slows down, that means that it beeped faster. Beep, 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 beep. That means that there's not as much lag in between, so that means that the brain is moving faster. And that's what happened in this particular case. We've got a ton of blue right here, and the blue means that the lag slowed down. And because the lag slowed down, that means we have an increased amount of that particular wave that's going on right there. And so that would give us a little bit of information to say, okay, the overall picture of what's going on right there is saying to me, I got a certain area of my brain that's not quite firing to the level that I want it to, and what it's doing is it's decreased in its activity. So that's that what that will do is that will correlate now with certain symptoms that I may be dealing with. Now, you can't just take that piece and say that the person's going to correlate with the symptoms. It's not the way it works. You got to know the patient. You got to take care of your patient. And then, hang on, I don't know what my calendar is doing right here. You got to take that piece of information and say, hey, is there something going on with the patient? The patient says, here's my symptoms. And then we want to look at the neurofeedback in the brain map to say, hey, did these particular symptoms actually match up? We get back from the break from you guys. I'm going to go over a different picture so you can have a different. I'm going to go over a different picture and see and kind of show you a little bit different way that we can interpret what's going on out there. We'll be right back right after these messages. It's Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult when you're explaining it, especially something that's brand new, and you need the opportunity to work through these things, and you need the opportunity to actually to say this stuff out loud. But one of this is saying is like, hey, I've got some slow waves going on over there, and I have too many of those slow waves. So what I want to do is I want to go back and look at the area of the brain, and this is I get yeah. So now this is pretty cool right here because this gives us the area of the brain. Let me before we get back on the show, let me see if I can make this a little smaller so we can see the whole thing. And this is just one. This is this 1 to 2 hertz. So it starts up here at 1 hertz, and you can see where the activity is. And um, I'm gonna get us through this right quick. I don't know if we got. I'm gonna try to look and see before we move along if did we make it to Instagram or not. I can't really tell. Uh, I keep trying to make it over there, but for some reason, it doesn't appear like we made it. Doesn't really matter. We made it to Facebook, and I know some of you guys are watching this on Facebook, and some of you guys are watching this on X too. So hopefully, all that works out pretty good. I had a brain map that we did this morning that I went over with the lady, and it was really cool because um, it was really cool because well, let me get us back on the radio and then I'll tell you. Okay, everybody, we're back. This is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, and we're trying to walk through some brain mapping tonight, just so I could try to verbalize it, and hopefully, I'm going to get better at verbalizing it as I go. But um, I was let me get through this, and then I'll tell all the social media people. I'll talk about the brain map a little bit that I went over earlier today. But I think this is a really cool picture right here. Um, because it takes that same piece of information that we just looked at. So we got an overall scan, and what it's saying is that hey, I've got some slow brain waves that I have too many of. Now, what does that mean to me? I don't necessarily know for sure because I don't feel like there's anything going on with me. Like I don't feel drowsy. Maybe I was a little drowsy that day. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe I'm uh, lack of concentration. Maybe there's something going on. Maybe my brain's not processing that information very well. Whatever that could be happening, right? Um, well, now you get into this other picture, and this is called the S. Loretta, and so it's a breakdown, and what we're looking at is we're looking at slices of the brain starting the slices of the brain starting at, there's the eyeballs, and this isn't my eyes, it's just a representation of my brain, but it starts with the eyeballs, and then it just starts moving up, and it starts moving up as you go through there, and then you get to the top of the brain here at then this outer level. So it's what it's doing is it's showing you exactly all of these points that are uh, are being measured, and there's I don't remember, it's 600, it's 6,239 points, I believe, are the number of points that are being measured in the Eslaretta. Um, yeah, 6,239 points is what we're measuring right here. So, but globally for us, what we're saying right there is we have a hyperactivity in this low frequency on the left side of the brain. That's a part that I think is super cool. And that's the part that is really going to help me to fire, because it's not that atypical. If you go through there and you looked at the rest of it, you could look at the rest. It's just in these very low frequencies. There's 2 hertz. It goes 3 hertz. And then as soon as we get out of that, from 4 hertz all the way through, from 5 hertz up the rest of my brain, there's very little abnormal activity, especially when I get into this 8 to 12 hertz, which we consider the alpha. It's perfect. There's no other colors as we go through there. And then there's one little dot there, and then there's a little bit at the very top. I think I'll scroll up real fast. Don't get dizzy watching that if you're watching it. But I think when we get up there, no, it was actually, might have been yeah, nothing. There's nothing else left. All those other colors are, there's no other abnormal activity for me other than that particular day when I scanned myself. I had low activity on the left hemisphere of the brain, and now we can go back to the other picture and say, what is that activity? We Not low activity, high activity. Sorry, it's red, means an increased amount of activity. I had increased amount of activity on the left hemisphere of my brain that particular day. Why is that? And what was it? Well, what it was it was high activity of delta. I had increased amount of the slow waves over there on that side. So what was I doing that particular day? You know what was really cool about this is the day that we did it, this was in March, the day that we did it was the training that we did with the doc in New Jersey, who helped me train on this information and this technology. And what I ended up, what I was doing the whole time was completely unknown. I was working mostly that day. I was working on the right hemisphere of my brain. I was working with the right hemisphere of my brain. And that was something that, I don't know. I mean, it's just the first 3 levels. It's just delta. After delta, everything else was firing fast. So maybe by the time I got to this scan, I was a little tired. Maybe I had been driving so hard that I got to this level, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I've got too much of these slow brain waves firing. Maybe that's making on that left hemisphere, that known world. Maybe it was just wanting to go to sleep. I remember being a little bit drowsy that day, but it just is interesting to me how it was just on the left. And that's, I don't know. It's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool to look at it and say, wow, it was just on the left side, and it was just for the first 3 hertz. I mean, you can see it. It just disappears right after that. Now, we've had all kinds of different maps that we've worked through. And one of the things that I went through today was I went through a map that was from a person that was dealing with, I'll reshare this one. The inability to get up, the inability to exercise. They were having a really hard time eating right and exercising. And the question became, what are we actually doing? What's the problem? Is the person, like these first two and this particular person that we talked to, the delta and the theta were completely in the red. And when you went down here and you looked at the high beta, it was completely blue. And so we had a conversation, and it's one thing that I don't think people actually realize. I don't think that the normal person, and if you're dealing with someone, like when I was dealing with my dad and he was going through all the stuff that he was dealing with, or I've had patients that are dealing with their parents that maybe they're not functioning. Maybe you're dealing with a child that's maybe not functioning the way they're supposed to. Maybe you've got a parent or a spouse that's not functioning the way they're supposed to. One of the problems that we had was um, I don't know where. One of the problems that we had was which one's happening first. The daughter of this particular patient was very frustrated because she said, "Well, mom's just not eating right, and she's not going to the gym." And let's just make it real simple. She had an she had an increase in slow brain waves, and she had a decrease in fast brain waves. And if we make it that simple right there, now let's look at behavior of what's going on in a person. And the behavior now is she won't no exercise and bad diet. Didn't do a good job with that eye. Okay. There's no exercise and bad diet. That's two of the things that this particular person is dealing with. The question that I have is, which came first? Did the brain quit working first, and then we get the symptoms, or did the symptoms happen first and that caused the brain to quit working? And that is a question that I really don't know the answer to. And that's a question that if you're out there dealing with someone that is not, that they won't exercise and they just won't eat right, they it could be both. And what I really want, and what I really think is that I think it's a combination of both things. I think that the lack of movement on our feet and the lack of nutritious food and the increase in processed food and the lack of sleep and the increased amount of stress that we deal with, I think those things all together, which you can put on this list over here, those are what I'm calling symptoms. All those things can lead to bad brain function. I think we know that that's true. I think that it's pretty obvious that that's a true statement, and I think that a lot of times it's very common that happens. It's very common. Look, you stopped eating right, you stopped exercising, you stopped getting your sleep, you stopped doing all those things that are healthy for you, and then what happened? Your brain quit working, and that's the trickiest part to me. And it really is. It really is a sad. Uh, it's a really serious situation that I don't know that we as a group really grasp. I don't know that we really grasp the depths of what that means, and what it means for our well-being and what it means for our future and what it means for the future of our marriage and what it means for the future of our kids, I don't think we really understand that. I don't think we as a society really understand that these things can lead to bad brain function. And then what will happen is it starts to turn over. And I don't, sometimes I think maybe it turns over first, but sometimes I think what will happen is it will start to turn over. And then what we'll get is we'll get bad brain function leads to the inability to go work out or eat right. And that right there is a very, very um, bad situation. That is that's one of those situations that is um, it's dangerous for you. It's really dangerous for you because I'm not exactly sure in the scan that I did today. I'm not exactly sure which one is which. I'm not exactly sure if the 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 brain the scan tells me that the brain is not functioning properly. Okay. Well, if the hang on one second. Did we come back on? I hope. Um, Having more technical difficulties. When I look at a scan on this particular patient, I can tell you that there's a high increase of slow brain waves in the delta and theta range. There's a low increase in the high beta brain waves, which is telling me that and what the patient complains about every single day is they have no energy. They have no energy. Okay. Well, that matches. That brain scan matches with with what the patient is telling me symptomatology wise. But what I don't know is, did the brain quit working and then they won't eat right and exercise, or because they didn't eat right and exercise the brain quit working, right? Okay, let's just say it goes that way. Let's say that it is the the brain was fine, but then we quit exercising and we quit eating right and we quit getting our sleep, and then all of a sudden it put our brain in a state that is not functioning properly. And now, because the brain is in that state where we're not functioning properly, we can't exercise and eat right because we've lost the ability to control that neurologically. That's I really think that's a thing. I really, based on what I've watched with my dad and what I've watched over several patients over the years, and it's something that I had no idea about when I was a kid. When I was younger, when I when I was a kid, when I was younger, in my younger life in chiropractic and seeing patients, I didn't realize that. I thought it was just basically the one way. I thought I thought because we didn't eat right, we didn't exercise, that we would make our health worse. But I didn't really understand until maybe these last 10 years. I didn't really understand that it's not that we're just making our health worse, we're making our brain worse. Like it, we're literally making our brain worse. That's what remember what I said last week about the grandma. And I asked her, she said the only time she really eats the sugar is when she makes cookies for the kids. And I said, well, and I asked her, why you do that? Why do we make that? Why do we buy Pop Tarts for kids? What are we trying to do? What we're trying to do is we're trying to feed them something without planning, without working at it, because we're tired, because it's convenient, because we don't want to get up early enough in the morning to get breakfast, because we don't really want to feed nutritious breakfast. We're just going to buy Pop Tarts. And I'm as guilty as anybody on the radio. I've bought hundreds of boxes of Pop-Tarts in my life for my kids. I've fed my kids donuts and processed food and refined carbohydrates. I did that. I did that just like all the other Americans that I know that did that. And it wasn't until I got old enough and the kids were older. Jacob's 26. So if you talk about the last 10 years, he was 16 when I first started understanding this. And so it's like, I mean, that's great. I mean, when I really, really started to grasp this, I had already run the whole thing. And so what are we doing now? We're trying to reverse the thing in our own house. We're trying to make the decisions right for ourselves, but we're really not. We got too far down the road, and I don't know if we're going to be able to change those things or not. But that's what we're trying to do. But what I'm saying is that, do you realize it? Do you realize that the choices that you make are either moving you towards health, or the choices that you make are moving you away from health? That's really an important question. And I think the most of you that watch this show or listen to this show, I think by now you've probably started to understand that, hey, you know what? I need to make those decisions that are moving me towards health. And then I just want to share with you the idea that you should have confidence in that. Like you should feel, or I will just present for your consideration that you feel, proud's not the right word, but confident in your decision. You're playing like a champion. That I said that before. I said this before on the radio. Before I won the state championship as a junior in high school, I didn't understand what that meant. We practice every single day of my junior year, not really knowing who we were. And then after we won the state championship, we practiced every single day of my senior year knowing who we were. There was a difference. There was a difference between those two things back in the day. There was a difference between practicing not knowing who I was and then practicing knowing who I was. And when I went from Roswell High School to Eastern New Mexico to Texas Tech, every practice after that, I knew who I was. I knew what I was capable of doing because I had won a championship. So you guys that are winning the championship, you guys who are running the race to win the race, you guys who are doing all that stuff that really is moving you towards health, I think you should lean into that. I think you should work as a champion. I think you should walk throughout the day as a champion. I think you should release yourself from some of the stressful thoughts that you might have of, am I doing this good enough, or am I screwing all this up, or all those things that we say to ourselves. Because I think this group, the proud that are part of this show, I think you guys are probably doing pretty good. I think the most of you that are stuck with me for 10 months are probably doing pretty good. You're making good choices on a daily basis. You're getting your rest at night. You're doing your exercise. You're doing those things that it takes. A lot of you come get adjusted. I think that's a big deal. And I'll probably spend a lot of the rest of the week talking about chiropractic, and how important that is. I really think keeping your nervous system proper. I was having a conversation with a young girl today about joints, about popping her fingers and about joints. And I'm telling you, joints that move properly don't wear out in a lifetime. I don't think we can outlive a joint that's moving properly. A joint that's moving properly, that has the proper chemistry, will last way longer than our physical body is capable of lasting. I don't know anybody that will live longer. And the reason I say that is because every person that dies has joints that are perfectly fine. I think every person that dies, if you look at them, if you were to be able to go in there and do an autopsy and look at their joints, and you would actually find out that they have lots of joints that are moving, that are just fine, with very little degeneration, that very little arthritis, as they say, very little inflammation in those joints, that they're moving great. And you might say to yourself, like, you might actually understand that if you think, how do your hips feel? And you think, I don't know, sometimes my hips are a little sore. How do your knees feel? And then how do your ankles feel? And how many times do your knees feel challenged and your ankles feel fine? How many times do your wrists actually feel fine? Your wrist or your elbows, but your fingers hurt because they got too much trash in them, but your wrist feels fine or your elbow feels fine. That elbow joint, how come that elbow joint never hardly ever wears out? How come you don't hear a lot of elbow joint problems? And the same thing happens with the spine. There's C1 and C2 area, that the C1 C2 disc is almost never degenerative on anybody. Not the C1 C2. The C2 C3 disc, sorry. The C2 C3 disc is almost never degenerative on anyone. But it almost a high population has a C5, 6, C6, C7 disc that's actually degenerative. Why? Because those joints aren't moving like they're supposed to. And what about the joints above them? The joints above them are moving fine. The joints below them are moving fine, but the middle ones aren't moving and they get worn out. So you guys that are doing those things, that you're moving and you're doing your walking and you're doing your exercises and you're doing all those things, I really think that you should lean into it and say, hey, you know what? I don't expect to be getting sick. You know what's really funny? Since I quit eating sugar, I hadn't been gotten sick one time. This is 29 months. 28 months next Tuesday. 28 months next Tuesday. I haven't hardly had a sniffle. I haven't had a cold. Everybody was getting sick these last 2 years. Had all kinds of people come into the office that were sick. I don't expect to get sick. You know, I don't think my microbiome is jacked up like it used to be. And why did I get sick? Last time I got sick was when I got COVID in 2021, and I've documented that on the show plenty of times. And I got sick with COVID. Leslie's right at the first week of July. It was about right now. It was almost this same exact time in 2021. So 3 years ago is the time that I got sick. And we had just come back from Leslie's 50th birthday in Las Vegas that we spent, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 days in Las Vegas. It was a long time. And we ate ice cream almost every night while we were there. It was ridiculous. And that's back when I was going through that phase where I couldn't quit eating carbs. And we ate those ice cream, and it was about 2 weeks after that's when I got sick. Is there a correlation between those two things? I believe 100% that there's a correlation between the increased amount of sugar and the decreased amount of immune system function. And since we've switched it, and a lot of you guys are doing the exact same thing, I know it. So you guys are doing that same thing where you've gotten rid of the sugar as well, and you've started to find out that your brains are functioning better and your bodies are functioning better. You don't have to live with it. So that was a little bit everywhere, here and there. But just don't forget that the choices that we make are either moving our brain towards health or it's moving our brain away from health. And if it's moving our brain away from health, we might get to a point in our brain where we can't go back to do those things that make us healthy. That it might be too overwhelming to get to that point to where we can go there. So, hey, that's the show. I appreciate it. That was a little bit hectic, but I appreciate you listening to me tonight. Sorry for you guys on the radio that we got cut off. I do not understand why that's happening, but we got us back live as soon as I could. Hope you guys have a good night. We'll be back tomorrow night with Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, right here on these same channels at 6 p.m. Y'all have a great night.